I'm Ava Miller, and at 34, I had spent most of my adult life sacrificing quietly for my family, paying off their mortgage, covering my sister's legal fees, and giving up vacations just so they'd be okay. I never asked for credit. I just wanted to belong, but nothing prepared me for the day I learned they'd rewritten the family trust, cutting me out completely and handing everything to my sister. No warning, no explanation, just silence. That Sunday, at what was supposed to be a peaceful family lunch, I handed over a single envelope. Inside was one signature, and a truth they thought I'd never discover. That was the day I stopped being invisible. Before I share everything that happened next, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. And if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit that like and subscribe button. This story might be exactly what your heart needs to hear. Growing up, I was always the quiet one, the so-called wise child who followed in the footsteps of my sister Cassandra. She was the star, the one who effortlessly drew the spotlight, who dreamed big and bold. Me, I was simply there, steady, dependable, and always present. I believed in hard work and quiet devotion. I believed that if I kept showing up, kept making the right choices, I'd matter. That my contributions, though silent, would one day be seen. For years, I played the part of the silent shadow, the one who stood behind the curtain, supporting the family in every way I could without ever asking for thanks. I remember the day the housing market crashed and our parents were drowning in that second mortgage. I stepped in, no questions asked. Over 6 long years, I paid off $78,300, not just in mortgage payments, but in burst pipes during a bitter winter, in a new roof after the 2018 storm tore the old one away, in surprise property taxes that landed on our doorstep in 2020. Every time I handed over the money, my mother would smile sweetly and call it a family favor. "Ava, sweetheart, you're such a blessing. It's just a family favor, love," she'd say. I nodded, thinking those favors came with a seat at the table. But somehow, they never did. And then there were the sacrifices money couldn't measure, like the time Cassandra was arrested for driving under the influence. I sold my cherished vintage camera collection, something I'd been curating since high school, to pay for her attorney. It meant the world to me, but to her, it was just invisible. Or the Christmas I gave up my dream trip to Maui because Dad needed new tires for his truck. I told him I had other plans, but in truth, I was making yet another silent trade. Later, when Mom recovered from surgery, I found a reliable used Toyota and gifted it to her so she could get around more easily. She cried in my arms that day. But by Sunday service, she was telling folks at church it was all Cassandra's idea. Little by little, those moments began to wear me down. Being unseen wasn't just a phase anymore. It started to feel deliberate. I found myself slowly being edged out of family dinners, the cozy gatherings I once helped hold together. First, they'd forget to call. Then they'd just not invite me. I began to wonder, was I being quietly pushed out, or had I just grown used to stepping back into the shadows? The doubt festered. I always believed things would balance themselves out, that hard work would be noticed, that if I kept showing up, kept helping, I'd have a place. But lately, invisibility no longer feels accidental. It feels like a decision. I drove off before anyone could see the look on my face, or worse, stop me. Once I got home, I pulled out a plastic storage bin I'd been meaning to organize for ages. Inside was a patchwork of memories, yellowed report cards, faded ticket stubs, and a braided friendship bracelet from 3rd grade. But near the bottom, I found something that made me pause. A silver hair clip, simple but elegant, engraved with a single letter, E. My mother had given it to me on my 16th birthday. I still remember her words, "As long as you wear this, I'll always see you as strong." Back then, it felt like a blessing, a sign that she saw me for who I was, that I mattered. But now, I wasn't so sure anymore. I slipped the clip back into its velvet pouch and tucked it beneath a pile of winter sweaters, unwilling, maybe even afraid, to decide what it meant anymore, or whether it meant anything at all. That night, while I was reheating leftover chili, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but something, a quiet nudge, maybe instinct, told me to pick up. "Ava," a man's voice asked. "This is George Halston. I was your parents' estate attorney. Or, I used to be. I'm sorry to call out of the blue, but I've been trying to follow up on the trust transition documents. You never returned your copy." I frowned. "What documents?" There was a brief pause on the other end. "They were sent 3 months ago, certified mail, to your apartment in Garland." "I never received anything," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Would you be open to meeting in person?" he asked gently. "I believe we need to go over a few things together." The next morning, I went straight to the post office. The clerk pulled up the forwarding history on my mailbox, scanning the screen with a puzzled expression. "It looks like your name was temporarily removed," she said. A service change form was submitted electronically, and it only listed Cassandra Miller. I didn't say a word, just nodded, thanked her, and walked back to my car. My ears were ringing. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't bad luck. It was deliberate. I arrived at Mr. Halston's office just after noon. He greeted me with a cautious look and led me into a quiet conference room, half shaded by heavy drapes. "Let me be clear," he began gently. "What I'm about to show you reflects your parents' most recent instructions, but I imagine it might come as a surprise." He placed a crisp copy of the current trust documents on the table. The signatures were authentic, the notary stamp still intact. My parents had legally transferred all family assets, land, and company shares, solely to Cassandra. "All of it?" I whispered, barely able to find my voice. "I know this is difficult," he said softly, "but I assumed you'd already seen this." I shook my head slowly. "Mr. Halston, was I included in the earlier version?" He gave a solemn nod. "Yes, as a co-beneficiary. That version is still in our archives. Unless formally revoked, it should still—" He trailed off, then stood and walked over to his safe. With careful hands, he pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope, sealed with a golden sticker. "This," he said, "is for you. It's dated 6 months before the updated documents. Your parents delivered it in person." I stared at the envelope, suddenly aware of how cold my hands felt. "Why didn't I ever get this?" I asked. He sighed. "Your sister collected it on the day it was to be delivered, said she'd pass it along." "Of course she did," I murmured. I peeled the seal open slowly, fingers trembling as I unfolded the letter inside. My eyes scanned the first few lines, and my stomach twisted. I didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath until the page began to tremble in my grip. This wasn't just a sentimental letter, it was legal. A notarized copy of the original trust agreement, dated 14 months ago, clearly naming me as a co-owner of 50% of our parents' estate and retirement fund. My mother's signature, my father's too. And in the margin, a small handwritten note from Mr. Halston himself. "For Ava, a copy has been retained." I sat there in stunned silence as Mr. Halston quietly stood, giving me space. 14 months ago. That was before Cassandra moved back in after her second divorce. Before the family dinners began happening without me. Before I started asking myself whether I was slowly being edged out, or whether I had simply, unknowingly, stepped back. "I'll give you time to process," he said gently, placing a glass of water by my side. "Take it home, and Ava, don't react just yet. Let it settle first." I thanked him, though the words barely made it past my throat. Driving home, the letter sat on the passenger seat like a stone, heavy, quiet, undeniable. My fingers itched to call someone, but who? My parents? My sister? I wasn't ready to scream. Not yet. Once inside, I perched on the edge of the sofa, the letter still clutched in my hand, and did something I hadn't done in years. I cried. Not a sobbing, heartbroken cry, but the hollow, chilled kind that comes when you realize something wasn't an accident. It was a choice, a plan, a decision made in a room where your voice was never even invited. Through quiet tears, I started doing what I've always done, keeping track. I tallied the numbers like I was building a case no one ever asked for. I was the one who helped them pay off that second mortgage after the crash. $78,300 over 6 years. That included emergency plumbing, a new roof after the storm, and a surprise property tax bill in 2020. Every time I stepped in, Mom would smile sweetly and call it a family favor. But let's be honest, those favors never came with a seat at the table. That afternoon, I drove over to my father's auto shop. The place hadn't changed in 20 years. Same old corrugated metal siding, same squeaky bell above the door. I hadn't visited in months. Dad was behind the counter, sorting through a stack of invoices. He looked up and gave me a neutral smile. Not warm, not cold, just acknowledgement. "Didn't expect you today," he said. I shrugged. "Just came by to say hi." The air was thick with the scent of motor oil and something harder to place: distance. My eyes drifted to the back wall. The founder's plaque we had hung 10 years ago still gleamed under the light. I had designed it myself. It used to list my name beside Cassandra's beneath our parents', but now the golden strip under Founders held just 3 names. Mine was gone. "The plaque's been updated," I asked, though he didn't look up. "Cassandra's been more involved lately," he replied flatly. "She deserves it." I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek. So erasing someone now counted as a promotion? He shrugged. "You moved out. You're doing your own thing now, right?" My own thing? Like paying off their mortgage, managing logistics across 5 states, living in the background without a name. I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. That evening, back at home, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled up the Dallas County Clerk's website. I typed in my parents' address and scrolled through the property history. There it was. 3 months ago, the house had been legally transferred to Cassandra Miller. No co-ownership, no trust. Just a quiet, clean handover. Then I found the second document. Dad's stake in the warehouse lot, also signed over to Cassandra. No notice, no discussion. That's why the attorney had contacted me. By law, he was required to notify anyone listed in a prior trust before changes could be finalized. It wasn't a slip-up. It was an attempt to erase me without a trace. I stepped outside, still clutching the estate documents, their corners now soft and wrinkled in my hand. The sky was blushing pink as the sun dipped behind the neighbor's chimney. I sat on the curb beside the mailbox, eyes fixed on my name printed inside that letter, clear, official, undeniable. "They scrubbed me from the paperwork," I said out loud, because they thought I wouldn't fight. My phone buzzed in my lap. A text from Cassandra. "Don't make this messy. You were never meant to have it anyway." It wasn't just cruel, it confirmed everything, and it lit a quiet fire inside me. I stared at her message until the screen dimmed. Not from shock, I'd already lived through that, but from something colder, heavier, a mix of surrender and steel, a stillness right before something shifts. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed with the lights still on, reading and rereading the trust documents, the texts, the notes I had taken, until a decision began to take shape. Sunday morning arrived with that same bright Texas sun that once lit up my childhood. Only now, it felt less like comfort and more like surgery. I didn't do my hair. I didn't bother with perfume. I didn't bring the usual pastel-dyed eggs Mom always hoped I'd show up with. Instead, I picked up a store-bought cake and a cheap bottle of red wine. No handwritten card, no love baked into it. Just enough to meet the unspoken rule: bring something. The driveway was already packed when I arrived. A few familiar church friends strolled about in pastel cardigans and floral blouses, chatting with Cassandra near the door. She looked like she'd stepped out of a Southern lifestyle magazine, hair perfectly curled, dress fitted just right, laughter tuned to just the right volume to draw attention. I waited for the conversation to shift before approaching. Cassandra turned, offering a polite, faint smile. "Oh, you came," I nodded and handed her the cake. "They were out of your favorite, so I improvised." She took it with a manicured hand, her eyes scanning my outfit. Navy blouse, simple slacks. Nothing to critique, nothing to praise, just neutral. Inside, the house smelled like garlic bread and that rose-scented air freshener Mom always used. Familiar, but sterile somehow. She was in the kitchen, directing a teenage boy I didn't recognize around the serving trays, probably a church volunteer. When she saw me, she clasped her hands together. "How lovely to have both my girls here today," she cooed, her gaze resting on Cassandra, "especially the one who's been here through thick and thin." I swallowed hard, not out of anger, not out of heartbreak, just data. Another entry in the growing mental case file I seemed to be building against them without even meaning to. Lunch was a serve-yourself affair. I went last, took the smallest portion, and made my way toward the armchair in the corner, my usual post. But Cassandra gestured toward the dining room. "We saved you a seat at the big table," she said sweetly. "Just for today," Mom chimed in behind her. "You've always preferred the sofa anyway." I took the seat at the grown-ups' table, not out of pride but out of strategy. Around me, polite chatter floated, Retirement plans, choir rehearsals, Cassandra's charity work. Then came the clink of a glass. Cassandra stood. "I just want to thank everyone for supporting my latest initiative," she beamed. "The Callista Grace Fund for Women in Recovery." Applause, camera flashes. Mom dabbed her eyes. "The seed money came from the estate," Cassandra added casually. "My parents believe in what I'm doing, and I'm honored to carry on the family legacy." I stared into my wine glass. Red streaks clung to the rim like evidence. That money, part of it was mine. Or should have been. After lunch, I did what I always did. I started clearing plates, my hands moving on autopilot, stacking dishes, gathering forks. But as I reached for the last wine glass, my father appeared at my side. "Don't worry about it," he said, not unkindly. "Cassandra's taking care of things." As if I were a temp whose contract had quietly ended. "Of course she is," I murmured. When I turned, Cassandra leaned in close, her breath warm on my ear. "You're lucky I let you come today." That was enough. I needed air. I needed space. I excused myself and walked down the hallway to the guest bathroom, the one I painted 6 years ago while Mom was recovering. The scent was still the same, lavender sachets with a hint of pine from the old wood trim. I locked the door and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't old. She was just tired. Tired in that quiet, invisible way that comes from being overlooked for too long. And in that stillness, the memories came. Not as stories, but flashes. Selling my vintage camera collection to pay Cassandra's DUI lawyer. Skipping Christmas in Maui because Dad needed new tires. Watching Mom cry with gratitude when I gave her that used Toyota. Only to hear her tell everyone at church it was Cassandra's idea. I opened the cabinet, reaching for tissues, and spotted a thick envelope wedged between expired Tylenol and faded grocery coupons. My stomach dropped. I pulled it out. Cream cardstock, gold trim, an invitation. A formal dinner to honor Cassandra Grace Miller as the sole heir to the Miller family vision. The date? Next month. I sat on the closed toilet, reading the words again and again. They were throwing a party with family money to celebrate rewriting history, to toast her for stealing what I helped build. And they weren't even pretending anymore. I flushed the toilet without using it, washed my hands slowly, and opened the door. Cassandra stood in the hallway, chatting about guest lists, and whether to serve chicken or beef. I walked straight past her. No confrontation, no scene. Just a whisper, "I hope you enjoy your last meal where no one questions your lies." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. But I was going to change things, one document at a time. There was no alarm the next morning. I was already awake. I'd barely slept, but I wasn't tired. I was focused. Sharply, almost eerily so. That kind of clarity only comes when there's nothing left to lose. I called out of work, told my boss I had to handle some family paperwork. I didn't offer details. I didn't need to. After a quick cup of coffee and a check to make sure the documents were still in my bag, I headed downtown. The drive to the county courthouse was quiet. No music, just the hum of traffic, and the steady beat of my own heart in my ears. The line at the records office was, thankfully, short. I filled out the request form for public property records, feeling the sweat gather beneath my shirt as I wrote my name. I handed it to the clerk with a polite smile and took a seat. 10 minutes later, someone called my name and slid a folder across the counter. Inside were deeds and legal filings related to our family's properties, including the lake house at Cedar Ridge. That house had always been a dream. My father's grandfather built it with his own hands. Every summer growing up, it had been our escape from the heat of Texas and the heat inside our own home. I once believed that, if healing was possible, it would happen there. But the paper in my hands told a different story. There it was, a quitclaim deed dated just 3 months ago, transferring full ownership to Cassandra Miller, signed, notarized, sealed. At first glance, it looked official. But then I saw it, the signature. Ronald C. Miller. The loops were off. The slant was wrong. It was almost but not quite his handwriting. I didn't need a handwriting expert to know what I knew. I'd seen that signature before, years ago, on a field trip release form when Dad was out of town in Houston. Mom had signed it for him, mumbling that he'd agree anyway. Back then, it felt harmless. Now, I wasn't so sure. I printed 2 copies, slipped them gently into my folder, and left the courthouse with a kind of numb calm. I didn't rush. I didn't text anyone. Instead, I called Mr. Davison, our old family estate attorney. He'd retired 2 years ago but still kept an office at his home off McKay Avenue. When I told him what I'd found, he paused, but agreed to see me that afternoon. The moment I stepped into his sunlit office, I felt 12 again, hand in hand with Dad during a will update meeting. Mr. Davison had that presence, steady, measured, reassuring. He listened quietly, without interrupting once, as I laid out the documents. Then he took the deed, adjusted his glasses, and frowned. "This signature, it's off," he murmured. I nodded. "I think my mother forged it." He didn't look surprised. "I've seen this before," he said slowly, "but what makes this interesting is that your father created a backup trust in your name 10 years ago." I blinked. "A what?" "A trust," he explained. "One designed to activate if he were declared mentally unfit, or if there was credible evidence of financial manipulation. If this document turns out to be forged, that trust could come into play." The room was quiet. "Would that override the current will?" I asked. He nodded. "If the trust is valid and its conditions are triggered, yes, you could regain legal control over a significant portion of the estate." I left his house with hands that didn't feel like my own, shaking but grounded. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. Instead, I called a mobile notary and a handwriting analyst. I wasn't ready to go to court, but I wanted to be ready. I wanted everything documented, verified, armored like a shield. Back home, I carefully scanned every page and uploaded them to a secured cloud folder. I titled it Miller Archive. Just typing the name made me feel sick. That evening, as I was pouring tea, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I let it roll to voicemail. The recording appeared seconds later. "Whatever you're looking into, stop. You're not thinking clearly. You don't want to tear this family apart." I pressed play. It was my mother's voice, soft, composed, soothing like a lullaby laced with poison. She was right about one thing. I didn't want to destroy the family. I just wanted them to stop destroying me. By Friday afternoon, I had every piece of the puzzle, though I barely had the will to look at them anymore. The handwriting analyst had emailed me their findings. Precise, clinical, devoid of sympathy. The signature on the quitclaim deed shows significant inconsistencies and is highly unlikely to have been written by the same individual who signed previous documents under the name Ronald C. Miller. It was everything I feared, and everything I needed. I saved the file into my encrypted folder, along with the scanned copy of the original trust and the newer version, the one that erased my name. I renamed the folder Estate Integrity. It sounded like a corporate security protocol, which somehow felt fitting, because this wasn't just a family matter anymore. It had been orchestrated, calculated. That night, I tried to cook dinner, but ended up staring at a smoking pan. My appetite had vanished, replaced by a restless energy that even sleep couldn't settle. Saturday passed in a haze. I went to the market, did laundry, vacuumed the same patch of carpet 3 times. I told myself I wasn't thinking, but my body knew. I was bracing for something. And sure enough, Sunday morning brought it. A message from Cassandra. "Mom wants brunch at Stone Cafe. Neutral ground. We should talk. Don't bring trouble." I stared at it for a long moment before replying, "I'll be there." But I wasn't going to reconcile. I was going to measure the distance between the woman they still believed I was and the woman I'd quietly become. Stone Cafe in Plano is all glass walls and industrial lighting, overpriced croissants, and flavorless eggs. Not my kind of place, but perfect for people who like being seen. They were already seated when I arrived. Mom wore one of her coral blazers, the kind she saved for conversations with weight. Cassandra rose with open arms, like we were old friends crossing continents. "Ava," she said, air kissing the space beside my cheek. "Glad you came." I gave her a half smile and sat down. The server delivered mimosas. I declined. The small talk started: weather, church announcements, the neighbor's new fence. But Cassandra choreographed every topic like a hostess in full control, quoting scripture to support her views on forgiveness, and humbly bragging about a recent charity gala. Then Mom leaned in, touching my wrist lightly. "You'll understand one day, Ava," she said softly. "We didn't want you burdened with estate matters. You've always been the more sensitive one." There it was again, sensitive, not just a word, a verdict, a way to edge me out gently, motherly even. I felt a heat rise behind my ears, but I kept still. I wouldn't lose control. Not here, not for them. I dabbed my lips with my napkin and set it gently on the table. I may be sensitive, I said quietly, but I'm not blind, and I'm not small. Not anymore. Their smiles froze mid-expression. I stood, pulled out my wallet, and placed a $20 bill on the table beside my untouched omelet. Cassandra blinked. Ava, come on, don't be dramatic. I didn't look at her. Drama requires performance. I'm just done pretending this isn't real. I turned and walked away, slowly, deliberately. The kind of exit where silence says more than a slammed door, but she couldn't help herself. You're overreacting, Cassandra called after me. No one's trying to take anything from you. I paused at the host stand, glancing back. Funny, I said. The paperwork says the same thing. Outside, the air was brisk and real. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just walked, because I wasn't closing a chapter. I was preparing to write a new one, in my own hand. The glass doors of the county clerk's office shut behind me, sealing out the noise of Plano's traffic and the hum of its downtown pulse. I stood there for a moment, in that sterile hallway, clutching the brown envelope I hadn't planned to bring. Inside it were my questions, and maybe, finally, a few answers. I stepped up to the records window, gave my name, and requested copies of all property transfers filed under my family's name in the past 5 years. I braced for a delay, but the clerk barely looked up. Workstation 3, she said, sliding me a plastic visitor card. They've been digitized. I made my way to the screen, logged in, and began to type. The deed appeared almost instantly, cleaner than I expected. A lakeside property transferred from Ronald C. Miller to Cassandra E. Miller, filed with a cheery little e-notary stamp at the bottom. But one detail caught my eye: the date. The deed had been notarized the same weekend Dad was in the hospital recovering from a minor stroke. I remember it clearly, because I was the one who drove him there, who sat in the CT scan waiting room with lukewarm coffee and a blanket he teased for being too pink. There was no way he signed anything that week. Then I noticed something else. The name of the notary service, Texas Signed Notary Remote Division. I copied the registration number and cross-checked it online. The notary was registered under a woman named Michelle Vance, Cassandra's college roommate. I didn't feel angry, not the kind of explosive anger people expect. What I felt was colder, something that settled in my bones like winter. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was fraud. I printed everything. The backdated filing, the registration details, the entire deed. As I stepped out into the blinding sunlight, a quiet voice inside whispered, "This isn't favoritism, it's theft." I drove straight home. It was late afternoon by the time I sat down at my desk and opened the fireproof box beneath my bed. Inside it was the old living trust, the one Dad asked me to hold on to back when things were simpler. I unfolded it carefully. In the event of retirement or passing, it read in crisp, formal type, all property and assets are to be transferred to Ava K. Miller, biological daughter and lawful heir. My breath caught. I blinked, making sure I wasn't imagining it. And there it was, his real signature, not the neat, lifeless scrawl on the lake house deed. This was the wide R, the decisive C, and that playful loop in the B of Miller he always joked looked like the number 6. I stared at it for a long time, not in disbelief, but in grief. It was like hearing his voice again, like the day I was 16, crying on the back porch because I didn't get into my dream college. And he whispered, "One day all this will be yours, not because you asked for it, because you've earned it." I had forgotten how firm that promise once felt, until now. I laid the old trust beside the forged deed and opened a new folder on my computer. This time I named it Active Case Miller. Into it I dropped everything: the original trust, the falsified quitclaim, the registration file for Michelle Vance, screenshots of Cassandra's texts, bank transfers for mortgage payments I had made, and an audio file, a quiet recording of my mother casually mentioning Cassandra's sacrifices in a way that rewrote history. Finally, I added one last thing: a draft letter, unsigned but ready, addressed to the family's estate attorney. I hadn't sent it yet. I wasn't ready to throw the doors wide open, not until I had backup. That night, as I sipped water and watched the sky darken beyond my window, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from my mother. I pressed play. "Ava, please don't make a big deal out of this. We've all moved on. Be grateful that Cassandra is willing to handle things. It was said in that syrupy southern tone she always used when trying to guilt me into silence. But something in me didn't move, didn't bend. No, I whispered aloud, placing the phone face down on the table. Not this time. I opened my email. I hadn't spoken to Eleanor Hayes in years. Not since we worked on that Veterans Housing Initiative together. But I remembered her quiet fire, the way she could make a county clerk re-examine a lost record with just one phone call. In the subject line, I typed, "Client name, Ava Miller, breach of trust and property fraud inquiry." Then I hit send. I spent the rest of the night preparing, not just the documents, but myself. My black folder lay open on the kitchen table, each page laid out like ammunition for a war fought without shouting. I didn't pace, I didn't cry. I reviewed, I read, I reread. Then I zipped it all up, ironed my blouse until it was smooth as my tone, firm as my resolve. By noon, I was in my car, pulling up to the house I once called home. The magnolia tree still leaned slightly to the left, as if bowing toward the sidewalk in a quiet, familiar greeting. I noticed the wind chime Mom used to love had been replaced. Sleeker now, made of glass instead of brass. Sharper, cleaner, like they'd decided to start over, without me. I parked slowly. No horn, no rush. My footsteps on the walkway were deliberate, heels steady against the concrete. When I rang the bell, it was Cassandra who opened the door, already smiling like someone who believed she'd won. She was wearing white, not ivory, not beige, white as if this were some kind of coronation. "Glad you came," she said sweetly, stepping aside. "We're all waiting in the living room." I said nothing. Inside, the room was staged like a courtroom. Dad sat in his usual recliner, arms crossed like he was mediating a minor family squabble. Mom perched on the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap, hosting a book club rather than facilitating betrayal. And there, on the coffee table, sat a folder, one that didn't belong to me. Cassandra reached for it the moment I sat down. "This," she began, "is just a formality, a final draft of the distribution agreement. It's already been reviewed by a neutral party." I raised my hand. "Before you say another word, Arn." I opened my document case and began laying out my own pages. 1, 2, 3, quiet, measured. Cassandra's mouth twitched. "This is the original living trust," I said. "Dated 5 years ago, signed by both parents." Silence. My mother shifted. My father looked smaller somehow, older, sunken into his seat. "And this," I continued, placing the next sheet, "is a notarized copy of the property deed filed just last month. The notary," I slid forward a highlighted record, "is registered under the name Michelle Vance. Ring a bell, Cassandra." No one answered. "And this letter," I said, laying down the final page, "is from my attorney confirming that each of these transactions is contestable, and that forgery, especially of legal signatures, is grounds for both civil and criminal action." Cassandra narrowed her eyes. "You're making this up." I didn't flinch. "Then take me to court," she sneered, flipping her hair. "You're always so bitter, Ava. You left for college and came back thinking you were better than us." I tilted my head. "I came back," I said calmly, "because no one else would remind Mom that I don't need her permission to exist." My voice didn't rise, but it was sharp as glass. My mother gasped, not in shock, but in fear. Her hand found my father's. He didn't squeeze back. "You never said you wanted the inheritance," she whispered. "You've always been so sensitive. We thought Cassandra could handle things more gracefully, more obediently." I finished for her. The room fell still. Just then, my phone buzzed. I tapped speaker. Ellie's voice filled the silence, calm and cool as a winter lake. "This is attorney Eleanor Hayes. If we don't receive confirmation of a mutual resolution by 9 a.m. Monday, we will file for a temporary injunction and initiate review of all contested assets. I trust that's clear." No one spoke. I stood. My palms weren't sweating. My knees didn't shake. I had rehearsed every beat of this moment, but now I didn't need to act. As I turned to leave, something on the shelf caught my eye. A photo frame, an old family trip to San Antonio. But the picture only showed 3 people, Mom, Dad, and Cassandra. But I remembered that day. I had been there. I'd set the timer, placed the camera on a cooler, and dashed into position. I reached for the frame and gently opened it. Behind the cropped photo, The original image had been folded and hidden. There I was, right in the middle, smiling, my arm around Dad, sunlight catching my eyes. They hadn't erased me completely. They'd only tried. I folded the photo with care and slipped it into my bag. What they had tried to bury, the truth had quietly preserved. And as I walked out, the only sound behind me was the steady click of my heels on the hardwood floor. No words, no rebuttals, no more lies. The morning air outside the courthouse was strangely still, as if the world itself had paused to hold its breath. I stood for a moment on the stone steps, watching my own reflection in the glass doors, storm-eyed and steady. I adjusted the folder beneath my arm, drew in a deep breath, and stepped inside. The courtroom wasn't grand. There were no polished mahogany panels or golden seals like in the movies. Just beige walls, bland and clinical, but to me, it might as well have been a battlefield. My parents were already seated, dressed in muted tones as if to say, we're just confused elders caught in something too big. Cassandra sat calmly in a tailored gray blazer, composed like a boardroom executive. But the smirk she wore didn't quite reach her eyes, not today. Not after the living room showdown. I took my seat beside Eleanor, who gave me a firm nod without lifting her eyes from her carefully stacked files. Her presence was cool and focused. Every word she would speak today would be a scalpel, precise, intentional, meant to expose what others had buried. The clerk called the session to order. When the judge entered, even Cassandra stiffened. The smile faded, and then it began. After the formalities, the judge turned to Eleanor. You may proceed with your opening summary. She rose, said nothing, and pressed play on a recording device. My heart pounded like a slow drumbeat in my chest. The sound that filled the courtroom was slightly muffled, but unmistakable. Cassandra's laugh, then my mother's voice, then my father's, smaller but still audible. Just trick the little one. She won't check. She just wants to be loved. A silence followed that made it hard to breathe. You could almost hear the blinking of eyes. The judge leaned forward. This recording has been authenticated? Eleanor nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Time-stamped, verified, and legally collected by a third party present in the household at the time. No. Cassandra shot up. That was edited. Sit down, Miss Miller, the judge snapped. This court does not tolerate outbursts. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. That clip wasn't just a revelation. It was confirmation of everything I'd feared, suspected, silently endured. Now it was real, and now it had been heard. My parents didn't turn to look at me. That hurt more than anything they had ever said, but I wasn't finished. From my folder, I drew one last page. This, I said, standing to address the room, is the part they forgot. Eleanor handed it to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. It's a clause, I continued, written into the original family trust, signed by my grandfather before his passing. It grants me full veto power over any property transfers made before I turn 35. And your 35th birthday is when? The judge asked, flipping through the document. In 2 days. The judge peered over his glasses. Then, as of the day after tomorrow, no disputed property can be transferred without your explicit consent. I heard Cassandra's breath hitch. She turned to our parents, furious. You knew about this, she hissed. Did either of you even read it? My mother paled. My father rubbed his temple as if trying to erase the room. But I still wasn't done. From the pocket of my coat, I pulled something small and worn, a paper crane, faded with frayed wings. My grandfather had taught me to fold it one quiet Sunday in his garage. Then he took it, tucked it into his wallet, and said, You're the one with wings, remember? It was returned to me after his funeral, sealed in an envelope by the attorney. I placed it gently on the table. That little bird had survived years of silence and paperwork, and now it had landed where it belonged. The room remained silent as the judge delivered his ruling. Effective immediately, he said. A freeze is placed on all estate assets already transferred. The probate file will be reopened. A formal investigation into the misuse of family funds is hereby authorized. Cassandra collapsed back into her chair. My mother opened her mouth, perhaps to plead, perhaps to manipulate. But the judge raised his hand. You've said enough. I turned to leave. As I passed them, I didn't flinch when my father looked away, or when my mother whispered, Ava, please. I paused for just a moment. This isn't revenge, I said, my voice calm and clear. This is restoration. And with that, I walked. Not stormed, not fled, but walked forward, finally free of the weight I'd carried for so long. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pulled into my grandfather's driveway. No, my driveway now. The deed bore only my name. But I wasn't here to claim victory. I wasn't here to boast. I came to breathe. The house looked the same from the outside, save for a fresh coat of paint and a newly trimmed fence. But inside, it wasn't empty. It was full of memory. The kind of memory that wraps around your ribs and whispers, "Are you truly healed? Or have you simply learned to live with the ache?" I stepped inside and gently closed the door behind me. All was quiet, save for the faint creak of old wood beneath my feet. The scent of cedar lingered, subtle, warm, like the echo of an embrace. I placed the keys on the entry table and ran my hand along the old bookshelf, where Grandpa used to keep his black ledgers and gardening magazines. Every room still held some trace of him. A man who never raised his voice but left echoes deep enough to carry through decades. This house hadn't forgotten me, even when my family tried to. I wandered into the kitchen, now brighter after the recent renovations. Marble countertops, updated cabinetry, yet still. That same window above the sink, where he used to hum while rinsing tomatoes from the garden. I stood there for a while, letting the morning light wash over my face, feeling something subtle shift inside. It wasn't an ending, just stillness, and in that stillness, peace. A knock at the door pulled me from the moment. I turned to find Mrs. Alden, the neighbor from 2 doors down, holding an old envelope. "Found this in the mailbox over at the old church drop," she said, adjusting her scarf with care. "It's for you." "It looks ancient," I murmured, taking it. My fingers already recognized the handwriting. My grandfather's. Back inside, I settled into the old armchair in the living room, the one that still creaked in the exact same spot, and opened the envelope. The letter was dated just 5 days before he passed. His words, in those careful, looping strokes, stretched across the page like a steady hand resting gently on my shoulder. "Ava, if you're reading this, the winds have likely shifted. I feared they might. People forget what's fair when fear creeps in. But I've always known your heart. That's why I chose you. Because you protect rather than possess. You speak gently, but you stand when it matters. Justice takes time, but it always finds where to land. Loving you always, Grandpa." I folded the letter slowly, sealing the moment against my chest like a keepsake. A soft sigh escaped, not quite relief, more like release. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from my mother. I didn't play it right away, just stared at the blinking screen, but curiosity, as it always does, won out. Her voice was tighter than I remembered, softer too. "Ava, we didn't know how much you mattered until you left. Maybe we didn't want to know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just hope you're okay." No tears welled up, just a breath, empty but clean. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't ready to open that door again either. Some things don't need to slam shut to stay closed. That afternoon, I climbed the stairs to what had once been my grandfather's office. I'd turned it into a reading room, white curtains, shelves lined with books I knew he would have loved. On the mantel, I placed something small and delicate, my paper crane. It wasn't just folded paper. It was a part of me they had tried to erase. The child who once folded hope into small corners, who stayed quiet believing love had to be earned. That girl lives here now, whole, proud, unhidden. I didn't burn the bridge, but I wasn't rebuilding it either. Down the street, a group of kids ran past the gate, laughter echoing. One girl, maybe 10, chased a paper bird caught in the breeze. I smiled. Because I wasn't chasing approval anymore. Not from people who had looked past me for years. They gave away the legacy, thinking I could be erased. But I was always the foundation, steady, silent, enduring, the one who knew what was worth keeping, and what had to be let go. I stepped outside, locked the door behind me, and paused. No goodbyes, no announcement. Just morning sunlight on my face and a life of my own waiting to begin. Sometimes you don't need to slam the door. Sometimes not returning is loud enough. Sometimes standing up for yourself isn't about shouting. It's about walking away with your dignity intact. This story isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming worth. After years of being dismissed. Because family doesn't just mean shared blood. It means mutual respect. Have you ever had to choose yourself, even when it hurt? If stories like this speak to your heart, Subscribe for more everyday family tales that hit close to home. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one.